because we collect the requirements from the various components for their needs. This is when we're going to establish a contract. Now, in many cases, we'll have records of what we did.
In simple terms, Mr. Naik, you listen to what these guys say, right? You trust these guys. They're the professionals. They give you the numbers. And by and large, you're going to take their numbers. You said this earlier that Mr. Medina is more of an expert in this area than you are, correct?
Yes.
So these are the professionals. These are the guys who have the background. They give you here's what we need. This will keep our guys safe. So in 2012, our understanding is you ordered 103 million rounds. Is that correct? 2012, fiscal year 2012.
I think it's a little bit more than 100 million.
100 million, okay.
Right.
What did you order this year?
I think so far it's 41 million rounds.
And you plan on ordering how much more the rest of the year, or are you going to stop there? What are you going to do?
Getting out of my lane.
We are ordering more.
Okay. But it will be probably the same, but it's, again, based on what you think is in the best interest.
It should be pretty close to what we expended last year.
Okay. And here's what I'm getting at. Today there's a story. It's on the headline on the Drudge website, and it's, I think, a Washington Times story. It says the sequestration, tight budgets means Department of Homeland Security is going to buy less ammunition. So, again, I guess what I'm asking is this going to in any way jeopardize the safety of, and picking up where Chairman Chaffetz was, you said this may result in less training, shoot less rounds, which means they don't use up as many rounds, and you won't have to buy as much in the future. Is it going to in any way jeopardize the safety of the good men and women who serve our country in uniform?
We are not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize the safety of the good men and women that serve this country. We are looking at trying to be as efficient as possible.
This gets back to where I was an hour and a half or 2 hours ago, the credibility of the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, Mr. Medina, Mr. Naik, are you aware when the sequestration law was enacted and became part of the law? You know when that was signed into law? Mr. Medina, do you know?
I believe it was 1 March. Is that correct?
No, that's when it took effect. When did it become law? Mr. Naik, do you know?
Not the exact date, but I will tell you that we were planning for sequestration in advance, and frankly, we know that budgets are tight, and we respect it, and we
do you think the Director of Homeland Security knew? Do you think Secretary Napolitano knew? You think she knew? I mean, it was August 2nd, 2011, so 20 months ago. And to now say that, oh, you know what? The guys who wear the uniform and law enforcement people across this country aren't going to get as much training hours because, and blame it on sequester. And the timing of this to be this news story to happen the day you're coming to testify about a concern many Americans have that you got too much ammunition doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And again, goes to this credibility concern that Mr. Gowdy and I have been talking about this morning, where you have 2,228 illegal detainees released, blame it on sequester. 8 of them were level 1 felons, blame it on sequester. Oh, by the way, Mr. Chaffetz is having a hearing today on the ammunition concerns that many citizens across this country have about DHS. So we're going to buy less ammunition and blame it on sequester. And American taxpayers understand you had 20 months to get ready for it. Again, goes right to the credibility of Secretary Napolitano and this agency. So when did you, Dr. Naik, start planning for sequestration? Did you start on August 3rd, 2011? Or did you start on March 2nd, 2013? You said you adequately planned for it. I mean, that's a long time in there. It seems to me a professional, I guess I look at it this way. A lot of families, a lot of small business owners don't have 20 months to get ready for some difficulty that may impact their family or their business. But professionals running Federal agencies had 20 months to get ready, and the day of a hearing, we get a headline that says, oh, sequester means we're going to buy less ammunition, potentially jeopardizing the safety of the people who work in our respective agencies. When did you start, Dr. Naik?
First of all, thank you for your passionate inquiry. I would tell you that I grew up in small family business, so I completely understand budgets. And I will say that and I can only speak to my lane within Homeland Security, and I guess I could speak for my boss, the Undersecretary for Management. But even before sequestration, we can kind of read the tea leaves that things are tight in general. We're all taxpayers as well. And so we were looking at our budget for things that we could do to plan for not just sequester, but just overall good management. And because we did that before sequester, when sequester came in our particular lane, we were in pretty good shape.
Did you guys give bonuses to folks who work in your lane, to use your term, in your metaphor? Did you give bonuses to people in 2011?
I'm sure there were some minimal bonuses.
Did you give bonuses to your folks in 2012?
I can't speak to it right now.
Did you have travel to conferences in 2011?
We have tightened down on everything,
But you did
including
it?
travel and conferences.
What about 2012? Did you continue to have folks go to conferences and travel in 2012?
I can't recall. Very minimal, if anything.
All right. Again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this hearing, but this, the credibility of Secretary Napolitano and how she runs this agency is, I think, in serious question. I yield back.
Thank you. Does any other member have an additional question? Otherwise, we also have a second panel. So the gentleman's from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have some really quick questions we'll get through. You can, short answers will be sufficient. We talked to you, following up my last conversation, my last questioning, we talked about practice ammo, qualification ammo, operational ammo for an officer. Do you have an SRT or a special response team in the Social Security?
No, we don't.
Good. Mr. Medina, you do, don't you?
Yes, we do.
Quite a few of them.
We have, yeah, yes, we
Right.
do.
During training, training is pretty intense.
It sure is.
Not unusual to fire maybe 500 rounds of ammunition or something along those lines?
It is not, depending.
Not unusual at all, is it?
No, it is not.
Pistol ammunition, do you teach combat pistol techniques?
We sure do.
Not unusual to fire 90 rounds, 200 rounds in a course of fire for training. How often do you do that? 4 times a year, once a year?
SRTs train monthly, and sometimes twice a month. Depends on the
So
operation.
twice a month, an officer could fire 500 rounds each training exercise?
Well, they're not always live fire. It depends on whether it
Sim
is
rounds,
live fire.
correct?
Sometimes it's sim rounds, and sometimes they're just actually doing CQB work, so no
Okay.
firing is involved.
So how often actual fire putting rounds downrange?
Well, they have to shoot a minimum of quarterly with all their SRT-issued weapons, but in some cases they may shoot monthly.
Okay, so, and they'll do practice as well, won't they? It's
They
not
sure will.
unusual to find a dedicated officer out there doing it almost once a week.
That is correct.
I understand. Okay, now I'm starting to get a handle on where all this ammunition is. But my other question revolves around some of the line items. I'm still going through it and still trying to wrap my head around it, but I'm going to get to the point. I'm going to ask you some very pointed questions, answer yes or no. I have a lot of people calling me up and saying that there's all these conspiracies and so forth and so forth. You probably heard them. Doomsday events, civil unrest, you're preparing for that. Do you have any operational plans in the event there's a major or a civil unrest that you're going to arrest innocent civilians and put them in FEMA camps? Do you have any plans like that?
No plans.
The answer is clear. You have no plans whatsoever.
None.
Right. How about anything else like that?
No plans at all.
Do you follow rules of engagement?
We have use of force law that we follow. It's Supreme Court decisions, and yes, we do.
Very highly trained officer.
Yes,
So your job mainly is to protect, not for any conspiracy to overthrow the people of this country. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. We recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll be brief. This committee is holding a separate hearing on health care transparency upstairs. Very complicated issue. No one knows how much a heart bypass surgery costs or all the inputs that go into it. In this age of information exchange, folks want more information than they wanted 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Understanding that 5 years ago or 10 years ago it might have been sufficient to talk about training purposes and operational purposes and categorize things in that way. Would you anticipate, any of you, seeing some of that terminology change and having some of these reports made in different ways? My colleague, Mr. Benvolio, made a very pointed display there that I hope puts lots of people's minds at ease. But why do we need to get down that road to begin with? If what we're doing is shooting 1,000 rounds apiece in training, let's say we shoot 1,000 rounds apiece in training. If what we're doing is taking our operational complement of ammunition and recycling it into training, let's say we're recycling into training instead of expending it operationally. Again, a lot of folks get worked up about a lot of different things. Better course of action would be to prevent folks from getting worked up to begin with. Do you anticipate any change in the reporting standards that your agencies use? And I'll start with you, Mr. O'Carroll.
I'm glad you brought this up, Mr. Woodall. One of the things that we've been talking about is communication and basically getting the information out there to the public, to the members of Congress, to your constituents. One of the things that we're finding that worked very well, and might be why I'm here today, was that when this hit the press, we went out immediately and we added up all the ammunition that we bought, all the ammunition that we fired, and we put it on our website. And we put it out there and with explanations for it. And we found that by getting in front of the problem and getting the information out, so when any of your constituents called, we said, go to our website. There's a complete explanation to it. And I got to say, they've used that a number of times in the Council of IGs as the way to use social media to get in front of a problem. So hopefully that's an answer to your thing of trying to get into the 21st century with their explanation out there and telling the public, as opposed to having to have a hearing to draw this information out.
My mother sends me emails daily, Mr. Medina, about all the bad things she reads on the Internet. I've yet to find one that's true, but it still takes up a lot of her time and energy to be worried about those things. Any plans at DHS?
Yes, we are working real closely with our Office of Public Affairs to head off any kind of issues that we might see that give an incorrect perception of the ammunition use or any of the things that we do with respect to our duties.
Have we seen the kind of linkable public disclosure that Mr. O'Carroll describes at DHS?
I think we've had some responses, but I'm not so sure that we've done anything like that on a website or so.
Would you think that would be worth the public relations folks'
Sure.
time? Thank you. Dr. Nyack, I know it's not in your lane, but we care about how the people's money gets spent on the procurement side. Do you see more disclosure today, and do you see more disclosure coming tomorrow than what we've seen in years past?
So from my world, we do use the DHS Internet. I have a strategic plan for procurement, the 9 procurement offices, 1,422 people spending $13 billion. It's on the Internet for every taxpayer to see. We have an annual progress report against that. It's out on the Internet for every taxpayer to see. Nobody likes to have it come to a hearing, but happy to be here to answer the questions, happy to work with GAO. We will, at our level, provide all the information. And as my colleague, Mr. Medina, said, we'll defer to our Office of Public Affairs to use all the various techniques to get the word out.
I hope it validates your team that their work does not go unnoticed, since it was there that folks originally looked to begin down this road that we are today. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And as I'm also on the receiving end of your mother's emails, and I tell her how much we appreciate those and her hourly input to the public process. Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, the ranking member, Mr. Tierney.
Thank you. As I said at the beginning of my opening remarks, I hate to think that this committee's agenda and schedule is going to be set by what hysteria shows up on the Internet from time to time. And I commend you, Mr. O'Carroll, for having the foresight to anticipate conspiracy theories and to get your stuff out there quickly enough that you might be one step ahead. And Dr. Nyack and Ms. Medina, now that you're going to be apparently in a position to have to try to do that as well, good luck with that, because I think that they're probably not going to slow down the conspiracy theories. They'll think of another avenue to go on that. But it's the only other comment I have to make generally on that is that the sequester situation is nothing short of legislative malpractice. And it was committed by Congress. It wasn't committed by the people that are sitting at the table in front of us as witnesses or their agencies and departments. I mean, that was just an absolute failure on the part of Congress to be willing to step up and set priorities and determine where cuts were going to be made, or to make them in a balanced and reasonable way in conjunction with closing loopholes and revenues and other things of that nature. So to think that all of you should have thought way back in August of 2011 when there was a bill passed that said that sequester may eventually happen if the special committee didn't come to a conclusion, to anticipate that would have resulted in malpractice and you would actually get sequestration would have been some incredible foresight on your part. But I commend Dr. Nyack, Ms. Medina, and Mr. O'Carroll for at least planning that it might happen on that respect or like that. But it's certainly the case that no matter what you do in terms of that, you're still going to be cutting. You're still going to be having less programs and less situation that you had before, and it's going to be painful. But now people that caused it to happen just aren't going to own up to it. They're going to think it was some process thing and try to convince people they had nothing to do with it, when in fact they had everything to do with it. And as a result, it is because, the way they can claim on one hand that everything the government does is waste, fraud, and abuse, being apparently unable to show that, they want to make the cuts and then claim they had nothing to do with it, and they go, oh my God, isn't that terrible? They should have cut waste, fraud, and abuse instead of what they're doing. Meanwhile, the sequestration order very clearly in the statute doesn't allow the kind of flexibility that everybody's running around claiming exists. It's right down to the program and activity level, and you're stuck with it, with very, very little ability to move around on. So if we all want to have a truth-telling session here, that's where it lays. And I know you're doing the best that you can. I know that we probably can have some savings and maybe a little more transparency and get down that avenue or whatever on that. But it's certainly, I regret the fact that it had to come to a full-blown hearing on that basis. For that, I think we could have resolved it differently. Dr. Nayak, you indicated earlier on that there was a GAO, General Accountability Office, report coming out. What's the scope of that report?
The study is procurement of, it's to review the procurement of ammunition at the Department of Homeland Security.
So address all the things we've discussed here today?
Yes.
Okay. And when is the estimated time of arrival of that report?
The study has begun, or we've received the letter for the study to begin.
Do you have any idea how long that's going to take?
I don't.
Okay. And no general experience with similar reports in the past?
Well, it depends on the depth and breadth of the study, but 30, 60 days.
Okay. 30 or 60 days generally? Okay.
Depends.
So how many people, what are the number of people involved in your office in gathering all the documents needed to respond to the committee's request for documents? Well,
it'll depend on how far they go down, but we have not
on that, on the committee's request for documents prior to the hearing today.
Oh, for today?
Right.
I'm sorry, the question was?
Number of people involved in gathering that information.
Oh, I would say, roughly 20.
And number of hours, can you estimate?
I don't know.
Okay.
A lot of hours, a lot of people.
Okay.
All good questions.
Mr. Medina, how many people involved in gathering the documents for the hearing today?
I would say, going back to the date that we received some original inquiries to get all this information, it was a large number of people because a lot of the information had to be gathered from field locations. So it's hundreds of people, lots of hours, and certainly a lot of work.
Okay. And Mr. O'Carroll?
Well, amongst other things on it is that we use this as a learning exercise to make sure that we counted every one of our pieces of ammunition that we had out there. So we expended a good number of people on checking what we had, what we have in our current amount. And I got to say and we use it as a learning experience to figure out better ways to keep track of stuff. But we did put a significant number of people into
Mr. Medina and Dr. Nayak, will at least that time expended be usable with respect to working with the GAO and compiling their report?
Yes, it will.
All right, so we're at least part of the way done on that work, and that should expedite that process. All right. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I happened to vote against the legislation that created the sequestration, and as did the member from Massachusetts. So it'd be interesting to have others answer that question. We're at the conclusion of this first panel. I want to thank each of you gentlemen for your expertise, for your passion and commitment to the country. I know that you're here and want to make it the very best that you can. As I like to say frequently, the United States of America is different than the rest of the world. We're open. We're transparent. We talk about these things. We got a difficult question, we ask it. And we have people come and testify, and we debate it in the light of the day. That's what the Congress is about. That's what this committee's here for. And I think this has been very helpful in understanding a situation that a lot of people are very interested in. So I appreciate your expertise, appreciate your follow-up, and the committee will stand in recess as we set the second panel. Thank you.